Hi, this is Mark Levy, and you're listening to A Shark's Perspective.
Welcome back and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. I'm Kenneth Kenny, but friends call me Shark. I'm a keynote speaker, strategist, a shark diver, host of this show, and your chief shark officer. What is your big sexy idea? Whether you're a solopreneur or Fortune 500, are you known throughout the marketplace with something that is subtle or a big idea that freaks people out so they'll remember? I mean, after all, who remembers subtle? But is your big sexy idea one that will make people talk about and say you won't believe what just happened? Have you created the differentiation to help people remember what your brand is? Mark Levy is a differentiation expert who's worked with some of the most recognized brands in the world. He's a speaker, podcaster, magician, and a noted author of 5 books, including Accidental Genius, using writing to generate your best ideas, insight, and content. And on this episode, we'll discuss what is a big sexy idea, finding that point of differentiation and implementing it, how others buy into it and support your big idea, personalizing that magic so you feel like that experience happens directly to you, subtlety versus freak out moments, ideas that people talk about after, a differentiating cheat sheet, rocking your idea to outer space, magical tricks, Cohen's and David's, Cynic's big idea, distinguished scholars from Queens College, other high IQs, a skittish shark, and a lot more. So let's tune in to a magical innovator with a magical shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Mark, welcome to A Shark's Perspective. Would you please give us a brief overview of your career and background to date?
Sure. So I'm Mark Levy. I'm a differentiation expert. I differentiate organizations and brands and thought leaders around what I call is their big sexy idea, their signature idea, the idea they're going to be known for throughout the marketplace. And I make sure that that big sexy idea comes through loud and clear in everything they do, so that anyone who falls in love with that idea out in the marketplace has to seek my client out, because my client embodies that idea. They represent that idea in people's minds. If you went to someone else to get that idea, you'd be getting a stinky, watered down diet version of that idea. Yes. So to get the full potency, right, the everything, you have to go to my client, be it a person or an organization.
So you've been a leader in this space for decades and you've worked with some major names and clients. Who are the types of people that you typically work with?
Oh, yeah. So all over the map. So I've worked with the former head of strategy of the Harvard Business School. I've worked with the CEO of Popeyes. I've worked with the former president of UPS. I've worked with Simon Sinek of Start With Why fame. I've worked with David Meerman Scott, who's on the stages with Anthony Robbins. Robbins has David on the stage with him. And David wrote the biggest selling social media book of all time, The New Rules of Marketing and PR. I've worked with, I have a background, as you know, as a magician, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it more later because it figures very prominently in what I do. But I have...
And you've worked with somebody at the White House?
Oh, yeah. I've worked with the head of two different, a head of a division from 2 different White Houses, right? I've worked with people from the UN, but the point, to go back to the magic, I'm not just a magician. I co-created the highest rated live show in New York City on TripAdvisor, rated higher than even Hamilton. And that's a magic show. So I've worked with people on TV shows. And so an interesting thing about me is I am a business strategist. Yes, like I can do classic business strategy, but also because I have this background as a magician and an entertainer, I tend to try to go much bigger when I'm working with someone. Subtlety doesn't work. You have to go for something that's really going to make a dent in people's consciousness. So that's a very different approach than most people would find going. It's like, what's this thing that you're doing? How is it different? And how do we freak people out with it is essentially what my work's about.
Define who the magician is in that movie poster behind you.
Steve Cohen. Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's Steve Cohen, the
Yeah.
Millionaire's Magician. Steve is the co-creator and the star, it's his show, of that show that I just talked about, Chamber Magic. And so Steve, the show is run now for 22 years and has made an enormous amount of money. He's had his own TV show and whatnot. And the interesting thing, again, with Steve is, and this should be an interesting story to me for anyone thinking about differentiation. When Steve first came to me, he was a magician like other magicians. Now he was a brilliant magician, but he was a magician like other magicians. And it was from watching him perform and then studying his background and studying the field that I said to him, Steve, there is no one performing for the decadently filthy rich. There's, people like David Blaine is doing street magic, and like there are Penn and Teller are the bad boys of magic, all these things. Chris Angel's the goth magician or so forth, but there's no one performing for kings and queens and billionaires and millionaires and all these things. So that, and he has an amazing background to do such a thing because he comes from a very moneyed area. And so we changed the way he dressed. We changed his differentiation. We changed the very tricks he performed. Because remember, I have a background as a magician. So that's when he became Steve Cohen, the Millionaire's Magician, entertainment for exclusive events. And that's where, he is the top of the top of the top.
What was the first magic trick you felt like you mastered as a junior magician?
Oh, great question. No one's ever asked me that before.
Were you the rabbit out of a hat or a card trick guy?
No, I've always been scared that I would mangle an animal. I'm too animal loving to
Now your wife is a vet. She can help fix the rabbit.
That's right. My wife became a vet at the age of 59. She retired from her 9-to-5 job and said, I always wanted to be a veterinarian. She was in her mid-50s, so she went to vet school then, and she just became a vet very recently. But the first trick that I'll give you a different answer. I'll give an answer to a slightly different question. Not that I'm trying to evade what you're saying, but this is something that comes right from the top of my mind. The very first magic trick I ever remember seeing, I was about 4 or 5 years old in Flushing, Queens in New York. My dad took me to a big deli, like a sit-down deli with waiters. And I remember the waiter, I still remember what he looked like today. He was bald and he had black hair around the sides of his head. He was bald on top and he had black glasses and he had a pencil behind his ear. And he said, you want to see a magic trick? And he took a sugar cube. This is how long ago it was. Sugar cubes. You don't see sugar cubes anymore. And he took the pencil from behind his head and he said, what's your name? And I said, Mark. And so he said, M for Mark? And I said, yes. And so he wrote an M on the sugar cube with the pencil. And then he dropped the he dropped the sugar cube with the M in the glass of water. And he had me hold my hand palm down over the glass of water and wave my hand over it. And then he had me look at my hand and the M was on the palm of my hand. And that was the trick. And I was so taken with that I just started studying magic. I started loving magic. And an important thing with that, Shark, is the reason why I remember that story so well. Well, I mean, first of all, it's the first trick I can ever remember being done. But one of the things that I believe made that trick stand out so much is because it was done to me. Like it was my trick. Like you won't believe what happened to me. It was my name on my hand. And, it's all those things. So this idea, when I'm working with people on their differentiation or their IP or their brand or so, we're always trying to think, how do we create an experience for the marketplace where it seems like it's happening to them? It's not out there in some objective, abstract way. It's them, So very important in creating excitement about a brand.
Yeah, it's a perfect analogy. So define, if you will, what a big, sexy idea is to a CEO at an organization or somebody like that you might often work with who's trying to define that, because a lot of these companies have probably been around a while. You're not getting them always from the very start of when they're forming their business. They probably have some maturity to them. And so they've started developing as a business. And it's sometimes hard to come and talk to people midstream or wherever they are in the process of defining what that idea is.
Right. Great question. So I work with people and companies from all different levels, very experienced to startups and where VCs are attached and so forth. I would say, so a big sexy idea is the signature idea. It's the idea you or your brand are going to be known for throughout the marketplace. And the thing that to me makes it different is that, again, the idea needs to be a freak out. Like it can't be subtle because people won't retain subtlety. So the idea, that's why I like to say the ideas my clients and I have created are known by hundreds of millions of people throughout the world. I mean, it's true. It's what are we going to do here around the idea that will make people say, you won't believe what just happened. Like it's essential that I tell people about this. I collect examples of this work that I've done, but also that I've seen other people do. And I always like to use simple demonstrations or so, because to me that penetrates the mind best. So I like to say in New York City, the Carnegie Deli. And so the Carnegie Deli, if you had ever gone to the Carnegie Deli, when they serve you a sandwich, it's about a foot high, and literally a foot high, not figuratively a foot high. It's enormous. It could fall over.
Yeah. Comes with a defibrillator.
Right. So they serve you a sandwich that's a foot high on purpose. It's not an accident. And they do that because the next thing that happens is no one takes a bite of the sandwich. They pull their phone out and they start to take pictures of the sandwich and send those pictures out on social media and call people and go and have conversations about the sandwich. Like, oh my God, this is going to be 3 meals for me and so forth. It's that kind of, and so to me, that's the kind of thing that you want to go for. So to me, again, big sexy idea is a little different in I put on the magic hat, as in saying, what is it that people will get them that excited they won't be able to stop talking about it?
When is an idea too sexy, if you will? And I think about, being too differentiated, not necessarily for helping people understand how to persuade them into it, but sometimes people want vanilla and safe. And I know a lot of leaders that I've talked to over my career as well want to always fall back on vanilla and safe. And I hate it. But for a lot of times, it's what's their comfort zone. And so another book, this is probably ties into another book you've written, where you've written about persuading the people who don't want to be persuaded. How do you help talk these people into understanding what this big idea is that's going to help them succeed in business?
Yeah, great question. So I would say, when is an idea too sexy? Sometimes, and off the top of my head, I don't have an example of this, but I've certainly encountered this many, many, many times. Sometimes people want to differentiate, and what they want to differentiate around is too trivial. Mm-hmm. Like, in other words, yes, it's way different. It's going to stand out there in a big way, and it's absolutely meaningless. It's like, so the thing that you need to differentiate about actually has to help people have impact in their life, and you could say, well, what about a foot high sandwich? What is it? For a deli, that's a big deal. You know what I mean? Like, you're coming there, the transaction is very short or so. So to me, that qualifies as a meaningful point of differentiation, because the transaction on the ladder of transactions is not, at the top of the rung. But so if you try to differentiate around something that's trivial, if what you're differentiating isn't good, because if you differentiate properly, people are going to pay attention to you. And so that means if there's lots of flaws in what you're differentiating, that's going to show up. So that can be a problem. I often have people, when I'm working with them, come up with brilliant differentiation, but it's not necessarily accurate. I'm being diplomatic. It's not necessarily accurate to what it is that they're selling. And so to me, a super important point to the work I do is you want to be as honest and transparent with what you're doing as you possibly can. As a matter of fact, a high level of honesty and transparency is almost itself a differentiating factor. If you're honest and transparent about what your philosophy is, why you started the business, how you go about doing things. So it's both being honest and transparent about why you do the work you do and how you make decisions and so forth, and who you're hiring and in the creation of the project. So for instance, Patagonia, if you go to the Patagonia website, not only do they tell you all about like how they started and what their philosophy is, but they tell you in certain products where they're falling down with sustainability. It's like, oh yeah, we're using this dye. It's not the most sustainable yet. We're working on it or so. To me, that is an extraordinary level of honesty and transparency. So the fact of, I don't like it when people want to differentiate just so they can stand out, but it's not based on anything that's really accurate.
That's such a great point. How do you differentiate that also with personal brands? Because I know as you're working with a lot of these people as well, we hear this in the speaking world, a lot of event planners, for example, they always want something new and different, and then they fall back on the safe. And so it's even harder, I think, for a lot of personal brands to do something that's too crazy and too out there. Maybe swimming with sharks isn't everybody's cup of tea,
right,
for example. But how do you sort of caution people that you work with who are differentiating themselves, the Steve Cohens of the world, to do that something different, that it goes different than Penn and Teller and David Blaine and so forth?
Yeah, you have to be comfortable with the differentiation. It's got to be, I like to say, a differentiation or a business idea or a business strategy that you will get behind. It will beat a quote unquote better idea. You know, the way I like to put it, a C idea with A implementation will beat an A idea with C implementation. So you've got to be excited about an idea and push it. It's, you will perhaps at times feel a little unsafe doing it, because I hadn't addressed that safety idea of it. But to me, like, there's just no way around it. When I talk to people, sometimes I'll say, look, the good news is that from the work we do, you're going to stand out. The bad news is you're going to stand out.
Sure.
So, you know, it's just part of it's part of the human condition that we want to stand out, and we're terrified of standing out, right? A friend of mine, Dr. David Reynolds, once said that to me, and like, I so agreed with him. You know, it's you, once you stand out, the marketplace will make judgments that are outside of your control, but you just have to stack the deck as much as you can in your favor, so that they make the right judgments about you.
You were going to say something about safety.
Well, that's it. The idea of you have to be excited about the idea, but no point of differentiation is going to be 100% safe.
Sure.
Because it can't be. It's outside your locus of control. So if you had a point of differentiation that was 100% safe, that means it would be ineffective. As Seth Godin, who I know you have interviewed, as Seth once said in one of his books, he said something like, all the boring spots are taken. you need to take a spot that's not boring, and that means it's going to draw people to it. And you know,
Well, you've worked with so many brands. How do you know when you've truly identified that big, sexy idea? You also have to sort of think through, is this going to work in the marketplace other than just the idea? You sort of have to really identify, is that really the great idea that's going to move forward?
yeah, it's well, you can test it. And by the way, when we come up with a point of differentiation, once the client has it down well enough, like I've rehearsed them enough on it, uh, I have them go out and start to use it everywhere. Like we don't overly wait. We make sure that they have ownership of it. Like the URLs, like all these things, but but they have to go out and they talk about it, and sometimes things change, but let's see, it's that brands are evolutionary,
Yes.
right? Brands are evolutionary. So in going out there, things might evolve in a little different way, but you would never have gotten to that more advanced point of evolution if you hadn't taken the steps to get there. Does that make sense? I like what I just said.
Yeah. 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 We test everything else we do. So,
Right. Just to finish the thought, I like to say that the work that we're going to do, I say our work is like the initial stage of a rocket, and it's to get you in outer space. It's got a lot of gas that it's burning up. It's got a lot of power. But once you're in outer space, its job is to fall off. So I let people know this is to get you out in a big and visible and exciting way. And it's going to do that. And then if things evolve, follow that evolution. But, we're going to get you into outer space.
what should a leader think through when they've identified that big, sexy idea on how they implement it with the rest of their team? Where do you sort of help that process evolve? Because outside of just a great idea, you've got to have others in an organization get behind it other than the one that you maybe have discussed this with. And I know you discuss with multiple teams as well, not just solely an individual, but
that's right.
Odds are they're going to have a marketing team and a sales team and a customer service team, and everybody's got to get behind something to move forward.
Yeah. All these are wonderful questions. Well, one thing is, of course, the old saw of people don't criticize what they help to build. So if you work with teams on helping them to create the foundation of the idea or how to get the idea out there, they're going to feel a vested interest in it. So they're going to want to do it. But I have an answer that you may not have heard before. And that is the idea of, I think I'm very big on people are excited about ideas that they can talk about and that they want to share with people even when you're not around. And so, for instance, with organizations, one of the things that I do for them is to create what I call a differentiation cheat sheet. And so what it is the idea of we take what it is that they want to be in the world, and we find every fact, figure, and anecdote that there is for them, and we put it together in a little script. And everyone in the organization, from senior leadership to the people answering the phone, they memorize the script. And one of the reasons why that's so great is that you giving people facts, figures, and stories to talk about, to substantiate. So when they go out having dinner, or they go out to have a drink on Friday night and they want to talk about their work, which sometimes people do, right? So now they can say, oh my God, we have the greatest company around. So everyone here on average has been here for 12 years. They've been in the industry for 12 years. They've been with us 7 years. As a matter of fact, we were in the top 10 of best places to work in blah, blah. You know what I mean? Let me tell you a story about this. And so I find that when you give people colorful ideas, facts, figures, and stories for them to speak about, they're more excited about it because they have something to talk about. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? 100%. And by the way, so other people have written about this kind of thing beautifully. There's a woman, Janie Smith, who, she's written some book, this kind of idea, but it's this idea of substantiating. Otherwise, all people are doing are talking of things that are in their opinion. And they like to talk about things in their opinion, but they would prefer it if you gave them some substance with which to support their opinion on. Does that make sense?
100%. And when you get them behind it, it becomes way beyond just a differentiating spectacle. It becomes a differentiating product or service that they can sustainably carry through months and years in their business, getting a group together to really get behind something and support it.
That's right. That's right. And that they can be, they can pick and choose what to say about it, but they have this potpourri of great stuff that they can pick and choose from. So it's that kind of idea.
So what is Mark's big sexy idea today in the world? What is the big sexy
idea? Sexy ideas. Your big sexy idea. That's my big sexy idea. Right.
Well, Mark, I ask this of all my guests, and I must ask you, what is your favorite kind of shark and why? The Delaware River, which you're close to, does have a history of seeing some bull sharks, which can thrive in both freshwater and saltwater environments. It's one of only a very few.
Okay. Only because if we want to say differentiated, I can say, what's the most differentiated of all sharks?
The Quasimodo of sharks, hammerhead.
That's right. That's right. So I love all sharks. They're super cool. But whenever you say sharks to me, of course, I think of the great white because of Jaws, right? So think about this from differentiation standpoint. I think of the great white because of Jaws, and I think of hammerheads because there's no other creature that looks like that. So yeah, what's the shark that you said to me? Because you and I have talked about sharks before.
Bull sharks.
Well, the ones where the shark where you say if they get too mouthy, you just push their nose a little.
Well, that's pretty much any shark. I mean, if I'm in the water, hammerheads I've come across, hammerheads are very, very skittish. Generally one of the goofiest fish to swim around, but they're absolutely stunning and beautiful.
What's the reason for their head shape? What's it facilitate?
It's just something that evolved over time.
Okay. I was wondering if their eyes are further out that allows them more peripheral vision or something.
It does allow them to see basically at a 360 view. Yeah. So, I mean, that just evolved over time. But one of the things that I love the best about the hammerhead is basically they can see the entire world around them. And it's their differentiation that a lot of sharks don't have, because they do have better eyesight than we do, especially underwater, but they aren't able to look at the world the way a hammerhead does. So.
Right.
All right. Well, Mark, it's that special time of the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Sure. As long as the answer to each one of them is hammerhead, I'm ready.
Okay. Good point. These are some knucklehead questions, so that'll go with hammerhead. So, all right, we're talking Jerry Seinfeld. Seinfeld or Jason Alexander, who played George Costanza. Think about favorite characters on the Seinfeld show.
Yeah. Oh, Seinfeld. Well, Seinfeld, I like to say, is the most distinguished scholar from the school that I went to, Queens College.
So Jerry Seinfeld, in real life graduated from your alma mater, Queens College. However, the fictional character of Costanza went to Queens College as well.
I didn't realize that. And I'll also tell you something else about Jason Alexander. So again, I have a background as a magician. Jason Alexander is a fantastic mentalist, like a brilliant. Really? He's played the Magic Castle in Hollywood.
Oh, yeah. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So see, there's more depth to the answer than to your question, pardon me, than I even initially thought. So now I'm struggling. I'm locked in this battle between Queens College and magic.
Yeah. Well, so you like magic, and you co-wrote Tricks with Your Head with Matt King about magic. Let's talk about magic shows and magical Davids at first. Who would you rather go see in Vegas, David Copperfield or David Blaine?
Well, I adore them both. I have to be diplomatic there. Because they have very, very different approaches to the world. So David Copperfield does these big giant illusions that I loved as a child. In other words, that was what symbolized magic to me. And David Blaine does this stuff that's not just borderline real, some of it is real. When he's regurgitating a frog or so, a live frog, that's real. There's no trick. The trick is getting it out of the stomach. So it just depends. Am I looking for that romance, that childhood romance of the giant illusion, or am I looking for something that's, like in your face real? So,
yeah, they're all great, and I've seen Penn and Teller, and I've seen Siegfried and Roy were very underrated at the time too.
Oh, they
were magic with animals, up to that point. So number 3, you also wrote The Accidental Genius. So let's talk about some smart guys. Which one?
Yeah.
The trivia question: which one has a higher IQ? Pennsylvania native Dr. Mehmet Oz or Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Schwarzenegger.
Oddly enough, and I never know where they actually come up with this estimated, it's believed to have an IQ of such and such whenever you read reports. Dr. Mehmet Oz was 158 and Schwarzenegger was 132. I saw several different ones that were just, regurgitated over and over on the internet, but apparently Dr. Oz is not just the man behind the curtain in Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Well, I know he went to Harvard. He went to Harvard, right?
He went to Harvard. Yep.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
but Matt Damon and Ashton Kutcher supposedly have IQs of 160, and Kesha has an IQ of 140. So go figure. That was weird trivia I pulled up this morning that just made no sense.
Oh my God. Well, one of the things that I love about Schwarzenegger is that he's achieved in so many different venues.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like in bodybuilding and acting, in different businesses he's had, in politics, like the guy to be able to go from different spheres of interest like that and actually make a go of things in a respectable way, to me, is extraordinary.
Yeah, he's been at the top of his game in every level. I mean, from bodybuilding to acting to being a governor. It's crazy.
Right.
All right. So number 4, you've worked with Simon Sinek. So let's talk about his books. Which would you prefer to read? Start with Why or Leaders Eat Last?
Oh, I mean, everything he does is great. I mean, I guess Start with Why, only because it's closest to the kind of work that I find interesting, the differentiation or so. What about yourself?
I think I liked Leaders Eat Last better.
Yeah.
But Start with Why was a big idea that everybody has regurgitated. Even if they haven't read it, they get the big idea. I think most people have not read it, and they can tell you it's a wonderful book because that's where you start.
Yeah, it changed the face of civilization. I mean, I've been in other countries and places like that where people are talking about it. It's like, all right, pretty good. He did a great job.
It starts with Porqué,
Right, exactly. Right.
Number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today.
Hammerheads.
Is biscuits or cornbread?
Oh, that's the hardest of all of them. Biscuits or cornbread. I'm going to go, I like food that fights you back. So for instance, I like bagels and things like that, where when you bite into them, you have to wrestle with them a little. So I'm say biscuits because I'm thinking.
Let me stop you. Which one would you rather pull out of a magic hat?
A biscuit. Well, I'm going to say biscuits only because when I think about biscuits and cornbread, even though they can both have substantial texture, I would guess that a biscuit would have greater texture because of the skin on the outside, or whatever you'd call that, as opposed to the cornbread, which is more exposed. the innards, the fluffy innards. So I'm going to go with biscuit because it's more substantial in my mind, in the theoretical images I have in my mind.
Great. That's perfect. So, Mark, where can more people find out about you, keep up with your thought leadership in the space, and
My leadership
differentiation,
on
your book,
biscuits. Yeah.
your leadership on biscuits and differentiation on
And
biscuits.
Hammerhead. My
And
new book,
it's the Hammerhead biscuit.
Hammerheads is coming out soon.
I have a recipe for Hammerhead biscuits.
Right. Exactly.
But where do people keep up with you?
So my website is levyinnovation.com. That's LEVY and then the word innovation.com, levyinnovation.com. And I put stuff up there, and I'm always out speaking or so. If you check around, I speak, I do a lot of keynotes.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Shark, thank you so much.
So there was my conversation with Mark Levy, a differentiation expert who's worked with some of the most recognized brands in the world. He's a speaker, podcaster, magician, and noted author of 5 books, including Accidental Genius, using writing to generate your best ideas, insight, and content. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from our conversation with him. First, Mark says that with a big, sexy idea, subtlety doesn't work. You have to go for something that's going to make a dent in people's consciousness. Your idea needs to be a freak out, not something subtle. For it to be that big idea, people need to say, "You won't believe what just happened." Second, Mark brings up such a great point on how a magic trick would apply to him. We do, as business leaders, create a lot of work that ends up in the abstract marketplace. But Mark, when working with his clients, thinks about how that magic applies to the individual in that audience and not just some nebulous faces. Continue to ask yourself, how do we create an experience so we feel like it's happening to us? Third, you've got a big, sexy idea, but are people excited enough to talk about it? He says that if you get that big idea, help these ideas grow by also helping form a cheat sheet with facts and figures and stories. Help people who are adopting this idea talk about that big idea, not just with opinions, but with facts and figures and stories so that they can substantiate it in their own lives, in their own stories, and make it part of their own DNA, if you will. Help make that big, sexy idea sustainable. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time, and I am so thankful to everyone who listens. Please consider writing a review and letting me know your thoughts on the show. Time to go come up with your own big, sexy idea. And once you do, then join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.